Is significantly more powerful than I am used to, and you can see way more of my dirty living room. Apologies. So, I have been. I skipped a week because I made a video that made me sad. This video is important, but I also feel like I am not as entirely qualified as I could be for it, because I really only understand one side of this particular issue. So I'm talking today about Toolbox stuff for kids entering schools. Now, I have been a teacher for about 10 years, and I understand education pretty well. I have master's degrees in education and in English, and I have taught in America and Sweden. Texas, specifically in the U.S., because every U.S. place has different education from state to state. Anyway. So, I'm talking about Toolbox stuff because I talked about this on the other app first. And I was trying, a very, very earnest person asked me, how do we give kids the tools that will help them succeed in schools? And I gave a 10-minute long, packed to the gills with information thing and said, yeah, I will be doing a YouTube video as well, and I just didn't get around to it. So I'm going to try. A lot of this information is going to be the exact same information that you had before. There's going to be some cat eye jinx because of the wide angle lens there. Hey bud, you doing all right? Feeling okay? Gonna do some springing. And I'm going to try to go over these things that will help your kids be better prepared for education if they go to a school in Texas or Sweden or honestly anywhere. Because a lot of these are life lessons that people, especially people who might have grown up a little more sheltered, a little more taken care of, a little safer, might have missed. And that's not a judgment on you or your kids. It's wonderful that things are safe. But at the same time, there's a lot of things that you learn through hardship. And you can learn them in easier hardships. You don't have to put kids through horrible things for them to learn the most important part about going through horrible things, if that makes sense. So I'm going to start with a set of tools. This is a toolbox. You do not need to have all the tools. And if you don't have one of these particular skills, it's going to be harder for you to teach kids how to have these particular skills. So no judgments. I'm not saying you're a bad parent. I'm not saying your kid is a bad kid. I'm trying to make certain that if you want to be prepared, if you want to better prepare your kids for school, here are some things that as a teacher, I wish these kids had these tools. Because a lot of the kids that I see fail or have difficulties comes from them not having these tools. So we're going to start with the idea of grit. Grit is a relatively recent term. But it is used in almost all educational work of late. Grit is the ability to fail without collapsing. It's the ability to fail without hitting that wall. A lot of students don't have this. A lot of students have been successful for so long that they've never come across a situation where they were unsuccessful and they are unprepared for failure. Unfortunately, it is a situation where I have seen quite a few kids, the first time that they've had a genuine failure, they missed a concept, they didn't understand an assignment, they just break. And it's tragic because it's smart kids. And the thing is, given time, they will succeed. But if they don't know how to handle failure, then it can be extremely destructive, not only to their self-esteem, but to their learning ability, because a lot of kids have never been adequately challenged. In Sweden, one of the greatest compliments I've ever gotten as a gymnasium teacher is one of my students said, "This is the first English class I've ever had to work in." And I was like, "Oh, thank you." And I was like, "Are you okay with that?" And he was like, "Yes, thank you. I have learned so much." And I was like, yeah. So anyway, grit is important. It is hard to teach. But as a parent, if you want to teach your kid grit, let them fail. don't immediately swoop in and make everything better. Don't immediately make things... You need to let them sit in their failure for a second. And I don't mean that literally. But you need to let kids have some sort of ownership of that. We'll get to that in a minute. Kids, especially the kids of the age that I teach, are just reaching the point where they have to take some responsibility. Where their choices have value. But a lot of them are unprepared for that because a lot of them have not been making choices up to this point. A lot of the kids that I teach usually between 12 to 15 if I'm teaching Grundskola, or 15 to 18 if I'm teaching gymnasium. A lot of those kids have been told what to do their whole lives. A lot of those kids have been told where to go, when to go, what to do, what is expected of them. And so a lot of times they have no real ability to make choices because their parents have made choices for them. Their upbringing, their culture, their community group, their religion, whatever group it is that has guided their life and made their choices, has kept them from having to make meaningful choices. So a parent who wants their kid to be comfortable with choices should allow them to make choices and for them to have the consequences that go with those choices. Now, this can be as simple as when the kid is saying, I want to eat all of this thing. Sometimes let them. Now, I don't mean let them make themselves sick or get fat like I am or anything like that. I mean, if you know that them eating nothing but sugar is going to make them feel ill, then maybe once, not all the time, go ahead and let them do that. If they want to stay up all night playing video games, sometime when it's not a school day, let them. And then get them up at a regular time the next day. Give them the consequences that come with the choice. Because kids should be able to connect choice and consequences. And I know a lot of adults that can't do that. So, no judgments if you can't. You want to make sure that kids can learn from others. They can learn from the consequences that apply to others. But it's good if they have something analog in their own life that they're able to tie choices and mistakes to. It's good if you can scaffold. That's what we call when you already know something and you build something else on top of it, so that you can connect their experiences to someone else's. Another thing a lot of students have a lot of trouble with is being able to internalize criticism without emotion. Most of the time, if somebody criticizes them, they immediately take it to an emotional place. You can't tell a kid, you did not do well at this, without them getting very, very emotional at it. Not being good at something is not something that needs to be emotional. Everybody starts as not being good at something. That's one of the steps to being good at something, is not being good at it. It is a normal progression. You have to start at bad, or you have to start at least at not good. Because if you don't start at that, if you are automatically good at something, then it's no effort and you don't learn how to make effort. And there are going to be some things in life that will not be easy. There are going to be lots of worthwhile things that require effort. Let's see. Another thing that a lot of Swedish children need practice with, but I'm sure American children do too, it's called shell critique in Sweden, but it's not just applicable to the books that you're referencing, the websites that you're referencing. It's also true with people. You have to be able to consider the source of what someone is saying to you. Because when you are internalizing external criticism, if you're listening to the bully and what the bully is saying, then the bully probably is wrong. And so you really need to think about whether you trust somebody to have your best interests in mind. And when you're considering the source, if the source wants you to hate a certain group of people, you need to ask yourself why. If the source wants you to not trust a certain group of people, you need to know why. Because if they're benefiting from your distrust, if they're benefiting from your fear, your hatred, your visceral anger, whatever, then you can't trust them. Similarly, if you were to ask me something and I were to you were not allowed to question why I said the thing I said, then you shouldn't trust me. You should not just trust anybody on the internet, but especially people who want you to dislike or distrust a certain group of people. That unless they have a good reason, in which case, do some research. That's normal. That's good. Question things. You can't really tune your bullshit filter if you don't spend time looking at bullshit. You can't automatically assume that everything you read is trustworthy. You can't assume that everybody who tells you something has your best interest in mind. It's just very rarely the case. For the most part, people don't have your best interest in mind. They have some way in which they're going to profit. Sometimes politically, sometimes financially, sometimes just ideologically. Not every adult is a role model. This is something that a lot of students need to know, because there are lots of people who can appear attractive, seductive, good. And a lot of those people just aren't. Sometimes attractive people are toxic. Sometimes hardworking people work too hard. And even sometimes good people aren't people you want to be like. Because not everybody does things for the same reasons. Similarly, a lot of people just don't understand what they want to be. And so there are teachers that just because they're your teacher doesn't mean that you want to be like them. And so you need to recognize that sometimes teachers as humans are going to fail. Sometimes they're going to fuck up. Sometimes they're overly proud. Sometimes they're arrogant. Sometimes they're racist. Sometimes they're, certain group phobic. And just because they're your teacher doesn't mean you have to do everything they say. You have to do what they say in a school fashion, but you need to be able to separate your education from your knowledge. We'll get to that in a minute. You still have to work with people you don't like. In the real world, this is a regular issue. Quite often, you will have a job, you will have coworkers, you will have a boss that are people that you will not like individually. You will not necessarily be friends with them, but you need to still be able to work with them. This is why in a lot of schools, you will have group work. You will have things that you need to do as part of a group. In Swedish schools, it can be a little bit less so because you can't force kids to be in groups for the most part. But it is much better for you to get practice at this age when it's very low stakes than it is to wait until you get to the real world. And then suddenly you're like, I don't like that guy. He smells like ketchup. Yeah, you can't do that when you're in your 20s. You can't do that when you're in your 30s. Because if you do say stuff like that, you're just going to get fired. You can see this, Violet. You're on top of my notes. Okay. Education is everywhere. Kids need to know that education is not just confined to the school building. A lot of people, adults and children, believe that education starts when you turn 6 and goes till you are 18 or whenever you graduate college, and then you're done. You're done being educated. That's not how it works. You're learning stuff from the second you are born and take breath. You are learning stuff from the moment your parents read to you. You are learning stuff. You are learning stuff in almost every situation in which you are conscious. And the stuff that you learn has varying value. Sometimes the stuff that you learn is just, Chinese food is tasty. Or, I don't like this TV show. It makes me uncomfortable. That's still learning. That's still growth. As long as you are changing in some way or having your current opinions challenged in any way, any matter, as long as you're doing that, then you're growing, you're learning. And that should never stop. It should not stop when you turn 18. It shouldn't stop when you turn 60. You should still be learning new things all the time. And most of the people who hate education, it's because they had a bad time in school and they connected school to education. And they thought, oh, all education is bad because my teachers were authoritative assholes. There are bad teachers. There are a lot of bad teachers. In my experience, and again, my limited experience, teachers are more that you can tell a teacher, a good teacher, is someone who is willing to acknowledge that there's more knowledge than they have. If they think that they had a bad time and kids need to have a bad time to learn, they're probably not a very good teacher. There are. Don't get me wrong, it is a noble profession to be a teacher. It is hard, but that doesn't mean that we are the sole arbiters of wisdom or knowledge or education. Not every fight is worth having. A lot of times, kids will get into this feedback loop of, I'm right. I know I'm right. I refuse to not just argue about it. And there are times in which it doesn't matter how right you are. In the real world, don't get me wrong, if the world were perfect, you would never have to acknowledge the fact that you're wrong when you're not wrong. But in the real world, in the classroom, in the whatever, when teachers can't really know, when teachers can't really be sure who started it, or who said something first, or who threw whatever, there comes a time when it's just disruptive to keep arguing. There comes a time when it's wasting everybody's time. And there are some teachers who won't acknowledge when they're wrong in the first place. A good teacher will always try to admit when they are wrong. A good teacher, when challenged and they check and they find out they're wrong, they will model proper behavior and say, look, I was wrong. That's my bad. I'm sorry. I didn't know about this one thing. Or I did know about this one thing, but it was too complicated for me to try to explain to the whole class. That's going to happen. The level of education required in schools is dramatically simpler than the level of education that most of us have as teachers. Because the more you study, the more you realize, oh shit, yeah, we have to dumb this down for kids. We have to. And roughly most subjects, we're not teaching you the whole truth. We're giving you, okay, this is 90% of the cases you're going to deal with. It's not 100% of the time. None of these laws are immutable or concrete. Almost everything that we teach is, okay, I'm going to give you enough tools to do this thing basically. Because almost nothing that we teach is absolute. History, we learn new things about history every day. Half the rules in math have a massive asterisk that says, in this set of circumstances that does not have any application. English is entirely, especially literature, incredibly subjective. Incredibly. Those are my three subjects. So, I don't know. I know that science is more important about the approach than necessarily about the results, but it's one of those situations where sometimes it's just not worth the fight, and kids need to learn that, because chances are as a parent you know that, because you've been having these fights with your kids. There's a time when it's more important to have peace than to be right. And don't get me wrong, in a perfect world, you should never have to not be right when you're right. Recognized. But that's not how it works. You also need to know that teachers are sometimes wrong, and pointing that out in front of everybody is not going to make you friends. Or if it does make you friends, it's going to make you the wrong kind of friends to be in school. Teachers make mistakes. We are human. We are 100% human. And that means that we're going to fuck up. And sometimes as a teacher, just like as a parent, you're going to make a mistake, and the kid's going to remember that you made a mistake. And you need to acknowledge that, because otherwise your kids are going to think you're not allowed to acknowledge mistakes. And then they're not going to acknowledge mistakes, and it's just going to become this whole thing for the rest of their life. Not all teachers are good. as I mentioned earlier, just there are bad teachers out there. There are people that are perfectly fine people who shouldn't be teachers, but they couldn't figure out what else to do. And so they just became teachers, and they've been teachers that whole time. And some of them hate it. They just do it as a job and then go home. And some people like teaching way too much. Finally, I'm going to talk real briefly about something called growth mindset. And growth mindset is the other side of grit. Growth mindset is the idea that everything, from failure to boredom to attempts that work to attempts that kind of work, all of that has value. And the idea of growth mindset is that everything is an example or a non-example of something. So, like, the idea of growth mindset is that no experience, if had well, is bad. So, any sort of situation, the idea of growth mindset is that any sort of situation has some value. It's up to you to find the value in a situation. So, if you have a negative situation, let's say you're stuck on a train because of an accident or something, and you then get to finish the book that you were reading, or you make a TikTok that's really funny, or you make a friend, or you do something of value. The situations are not within our control. We are often in situations where we have no control, where we have no ability to change them. School is very much like this. You are regularly put into a situation that you have no say in as a student. Your teacher has decided you are going to do this, and you don't have the ability to refuse. So what you need to do as a student is approach this as a situation. What can I get out of this? Even if it's just, man, I do not care about this subject at all. Given a choice, I will never waste time on this again. Because every situation, especially the ones out of your control, which is most of school, you're going to have some value there. Because if you don't have any value there, that's just wasted time, and nobody wants a waste of time. So when you have an experience, that experience has value, and that's called growth mindset. Those experiences can be positive things, that can be negative things, that can be what you consider boring, they can be what you consider awesome. Everything has value if you approach it right. That's the important part. Just doing stuff is not enough. You have to approach it from the perspective of, what can I get out of this? And I don't mean that in a mercenary way or in a way where you're trying to, it's owed to you. I mean, what value can I take out of this? And that value, like I said, may be a new friend. It may be trying something new. It may be anything. I am autistic. I have had serious issues with trying things, and my wonderful wife, when we first got together, used to challenge me, hey, what is something you haven't tried on this menu? And I would have to try a little bit of it. And sometimes I liked it, and I expanded my world, and I expanded my worldview. And sometimes I didn't. Sometimes I was like, okay, I have learned I cannot eat the kelp that sushi is wrapped in. The sashimi's fine, but the kelp, it's too bitter. So as long as you approach each experience as a learning experience, as there is an option that I will get something good out of this. There is an option that I will have something good, even if it's a terrible situation, even if it sucks, even if you're in trouble and you have to be in detention. If you approach it with, this might be valuable, this might be useful, then you can't lose. Because every situation is either an example of something you want to try again, or an example of something you never need to do again. And sometimes you're going to have to do that more than once, even though. Finally, it's very, very hard to instruct children about this, but it is super useful. If you can get kids to realize that failure is not bad. Failure is a natural step of growth. Failure is a natural thing that's going to happen. And while they're very young, you may need to comfort them when they fail. But later on, it's really just about picking yourself up, brushing yourself off, and getting back on the horse. Because we're all going to fail. Everybody has failed. Everybody has screwed up. Everybody has lost something. And the biggest difference between genuine, successful people and people who are unhappy, misunderstanding, is the ability to learn from failure. Some people never face any consequences because the world isn't fair. But the people who are successful and enviable are the people who are able to fail without it disrupting who they are, without it changing who they are and what they want and how they get things done. So the idea that failure is this world-stopping thing, don't get me wrong, there are times when failure has real consequences. And we shouldn't celebrate failure. But we should celebrate the fact that we failed and we're still here. We failed and we're still learning. We failed and we're still growing. Because if we can celebrate that, then we haven't really failed. Because failing on an individual level is a natural part of growth and a necessary part of our growing up. So a lot of our kids need practice with failing without massive consequences because that allows them to grow. It's really how we learn and how we live. And in Sweden, there's a lot of stuff that you are safe from. So if you want to be adequately prepared for a job in Sweden or elsewhere, you need to learn how to practice that failure. As I mentioned, a lot of these tools are useful for kids. These are ways to approach school in a way that you're going to more likely to succeed. Not everybody has a natural aptitude at a subject, whether that subject be literature, Swedish, math, SO, idrott, slöjd. Not everybody's going to have a natural ability at any of these things. Not everybody's going to be good at these things, even with work. But everybody has to pass these things to succeed and to grow up. So if you want the best out of education, if you want to make your child a lifelong learner, because that is the goal. That is what we want as teachers. It's not about, did we teach them math? It's not about, did we teach them English? Did we teach them Swedish? Did we teach them Slovak? It's not about the subject. Every subject, I've done another video, maybe I'll put it on here, it's definitely on TikTok, about every subject has a secondary purpose, has a value beyond learning math, learning English, learning Swedish, learning Slöjd, whatever. Every subject teaches you a thing, teaches you an approach that is applicable in the real world. And these tools will help you apply learning to school in a way that you can then make approaches to the real world. They will make school not a waste of time. Because for a lot of students, school is a waste of time. Because they're not getting the things that they need out of it. Because they're unprepared. Because a lot of parents don't know how to prepare their kids. Now, here's the deal, and this is the disclaimer, and I tried to mention this at the beginning, but I did not explain it very well. I am not a parent. I'm not. I don't have kids. I hope to have them eventually. I do not have them yet. I have been a teacher for 10 years. I have taught in 2 different countries. I have taught very, very poor children and very, very rich children. But I don't know what it's like to be a parent. And I'm not telling anybody how to parent. I am saying if you would like these tools, these are tools that I wish all of my students had. Because if all of my students had this, teaching would be so much fucking easier. But it wouldn't just be easier for me, it would be easier for them. It would be easier for my students. So this is an intention, this is an attempt to give parents the things that they can give their kids. Because these take time. None of these is going to be a box you can check off. None of these are going to be, okay, well, I told my kid to appreciate failure, done. These are going to things that they need to practice. These are going to be things that they need to run into in their daily life. These are going to be things that you need to be there for them for, because your kids need you in a way that they will never need a teacher. And it's one of the things that teachers are often surrogate parents. We are often your backup because we're with your kids a lot. But we can't replace you. We couldn't replace you, nor should we. But here's some things that you can do that will help your kids be better prepared for school, that will not make any of their time in school a waste. If you have questions about any of these, you are perfectly welcome to leave me a comment. I never know why people care what I think, but I do care about people. And this is an attempt to earnestly answer a question I got on the other app. So on the Clock app, I answered this question in 10 minutes. I've given it about 30 here. So I hope you all have a nice day. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you've made it this far, you clearly are listening, so you're welcome to my channel. Peace.